just name the poem this week that rocks your world, the poem that everybody always should read, the perfect poem, the poem that does everything. So let's start with Dave. Name the poem. Just name it.
Cottage Street, 1958.
It's 1953.
53.
And it's no longer in the main syllabus, and I know you always like it. And I guess you like it because
I like the voice itself, a self-deprecating voice, and it's a tragic subject. It hits you in the gut, and like I mentioned to you before in my office hour, I also really loved the bell jar, and that affected me too. So the poem talking about Sylvia Plath and her struggles really tied it up and affected me.
So that's a plug for ModPo Plus for Richard Wilbur's poem, Cottage Street, 1953. And I don't mind saying something about the anthologizing that ModPo has to do because our main syllabus has to be limited, but 2 poems by Richard Wilbur in ModPo main syllabus, forget about it. So we moved that one over. Sorry, Dave. Erica Kaufman, favorite poem or the big one?
Dinner Guest Me, Langston Hughes. And also, I love Gwendolyn Brooks.
Boy, Breaking Glass. You know, that might be the perfect poem, huh? That may be, but you didn't mention that one. You mentioned the other one. And yes, Dinner Guest Me is crucial, and I think it's a meta-pedagogical moment in ModPo that's very instructive for people who are trying to figure out how to include and what are all the pitfalls of presuming to know how to include.
It's interesting to look at the Hughes and the Brooks alongside each other because they're doing such different things.
Really different. I mean, Hughes at that point is really trying to understand, you know, here it's the 30s and he's a communist and he's got a lot of people who are anti-racist in overt political work. They're his colleagues, but they collect him because they need a person of color at the table. And so you get this presumably benevolent gesture that winds up consuming him. He's there for dinner, and it's extremely agonizing. Whereas Gwendolyn Brooks is just what, Erica? She's just saying this counts as art, people. And it's a much more affirmative statement. It's apples and oranges. Jake Marmer, name a poem.
I too like Gwendolyn Brooks' poem best. At the same time, I'm also most surprised by Mending Wall. Based on my discussions of that poem in class, I was blown away by how much came out of it, despite all the reluctance about Frost.
Of all the Frost poems, that's the one that tries to engage with the question of subjectivity. For me, ultimately disappointingly, but that's a controversial statement, I realize. Max McKenna, poem.
I would say Brooks's Truth, though I know that's not on the main syllabus.
It is.
It's on the main syllabus?
Yes, it is. It's although we only did an audio for it.
Right.
But it was a great audio. It was a long audio.
I think it's I think it's great, and it kind of picks up these this sort of Dickinsonian trajectory of power, poetic power. Also, Dinner Guest Me is great.
Oh, you're doing 2. Okay.
Well, everybody else is doing
I know. That's all right. I have to confess to everybody who follows the ModPo syllabus, my weakest point is God. I just don't do theology and religion very well. So I think you can see something of a suppression of that in the Dickinson, because I think it's important in Dickinson, and I just don't know how to deal with it. Despite spending the entire day yesterday in synagogue, you know, I just still don't know what to do with any of that. And I think Brooks, too, you know, that poem really has something to say about God and racial politics, and I just don't know what to do with it, so I'm really bad. So I'm glad it's there, and I'm glad you mentioned it. Molly O'Neill, name a poem.
I'm going to go with Mending Wall, not because I think it's necessarily the best or most crucial, but because it's my personal favorite this week.
Okay, great. Thank you. Gabe?
I think I'm going to shout out Interior by Genevieve Taggart.
Whoa, communist.
Yeah, I know. I like the poem a lot. I think it's sort of, it has, to me, it has a really entertaining and interesting dramatization of like the everyday stuff. And I mean dramatization in like melodrama.
Melodrama. It's a real political poem. it's like mad at the middle class for staying indoors.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, I hope we get a chance to talk about that. We hardly ever talk about that poem. Lily?
Well, everyone said the ones that I like already, but I'll say Gwendolyn Brooks' Truth again because I've been thinking a lot about the ending of that poem, and it's like very large and just kind of it goes from the specificity earlier in the poem of like a direct quote that's a very powerful quote, something like "You're the one who threw away my name" or something like that, and then it ends with these huge shattered outward opening like abstract pieces, and I really like that.
Yeah, that's cool. I think we don't do this very often in ModPo, but the perfect poem in every way is "Boy Breaking Glass" this week. But I also want to cheer for Ruth Lechlittner's poem about the abortionist, the abortionist's office. I mean, I'm never failed to move by the agony of her use of the traditional ballad in that, and her devastating critique of the church. It's just really, and in a pedagogical, teacherly way, it really introduces all the questions about content and form and politics. So, great poem, difficult poem, plucked from nowhere. The book is called Tomorrow's Phoenix. It was published in 1937, and there were maybe 60 copies printed. That's it, by a fly-by-night press run by a man named Ronald Latimer, who disappeared and took all the books with him. He was a sort of Buddhist. He was a bisexual, non-monogamist, communist priest. He was actually ordained as an Episcopal priest and a Buddhist who disappeared with all of his books and went to Japan and was never seen again. And he published Ruth's book, and no one ever saw it. And I found a copy of it years ago, and I've been promoting Ruth Lechlittner ever since. She did publish one other book later, but that she's pretty much lost to history, which I think is a great shame. Davey?
I've got to go for the ModPo Plus syllabus, and the poem for me this week is "The Voice of No."
Erica Hunt.
Erica Hunt, yeah. I really love that poem. And it's such a perfect poem for this week because of the way that it's picking up both in the Harlem Renaissance tradition, but also on the communist poets.
Yes.
If you haven't heard the poem talk that's about the voice of no, it's one of just my favorite things ever. I've heard that poem talk maybe 10 times. I just love it to death. It's such an amazing conversation. Her reading of the poem is incredible. It's such a powerful, careful, systematic poem.
Yeah. I love the way she introduces that in the Penn Sound recording. Mm-hmm. She said, she's doing it for Charles Bernstein as part of a close listening interview. She says, "The voice of no," and then she says, "I have that voice sometimes." Yeah. And she partly means it as a parent, and she partly means it as a poet, and she partly means it as a person who, for many, many years until recently, was the executive director of a nonprofit organization that was meant to empower nonprofit groups and small businesses led by people of color. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember I think it was called the 21st Century Foundation. Yep. Great person, Erica Hunt. Thank you. Carlos?
Yeah, I too was going to say Gwendolyn Brooks's Boy Breaking Glass, just because I love the charge of the language in that poem. But since that's been made kind of basic now, I'm going to say I also really enjoyed Incident again this year, because I sort of thought I had talked about in the forums almost all of what there was to say about the choice of form. Mm-hmm. But this year, 2 amazing new points came up for me, which I can talk about later.
Incident. Great. Emily?
Yeah, I think Mending Wall, there's something... it's strange to kind of enjoy the experience of reading that poem and also enjoy really arguing and kind of dogpiling on that poem in a certain way. So like 2 simultaneous but kind of competing types of pleasure in that reading.
Yeah. And there's a 1-hour-long debate that I moderated for ModPo about 4 years ago. On one side, we had 2, let's call them formalist poets, who were arguing for the poem, I guess you could say. And on the other side were Rachel Blau Duplessis and Bob Perlman, who were arguing vehemently against the praise for the poem. And it's I know it's long, an hour, but it's really a good debate. I had such fun with it. Anna, your pick of poem, and then please introduce the the phone call.
The phone caller elected to not stay on the phone. She really just wanted to get Gabe's book. So. I'll tell you about
Thank
that in
you.
a second. So my pick, like many others, is Boy Breaking Glass. And I won't say anything about it other than to just read the last stanza because it makes me weep. So, who has not Congress, lobster, love, luau, the Regency Room, the Statue of Liberty runs, a sloppy amalgamation, a mistake, a cliff, a hymn, a snare, and an exceeding sun. Doesn't that just like give you chills? It's so good.